There we go. So welcome everyone to the second webinar of cybersecurity management. I hope you've all had a good week and have enjoyed going through the exercises and starting to think about how attackers think about our organization's networks and our assets, and also how to explain a particular security incident to upper management. It's a really important skill to have. I'm very encouraged by all the different types and styles of questions. I haven't been answers. I haven't been able to go through all of them. There's been some very humorous ones. Margie pointed out one where there was a disgruntled employee of Target. That's very clever and quite creative, which is great. But yeah, there's a whole range of answers in there, and I hope you're finding that beneficial. So we really discussed last week kind of the intent of being an effective and an efficient security manager, and how to do that in the organization to gain trust and to explain threat scenarios, and really to build the foundation of a good security practice and the principles that go along with that. This week we'll be talking about two factors of the cybersecurity practice, both the operations side and the review and compliance side. And I've labeled this the warriors and the critics, because on the operations side we have the techno guys, the guys who are diving into the bits and the bytes, and they're doing hand-to-hand combat with the guys who are trying to break into the organization. And sometimes it's like that in an incident response, where you have an enormous amount of pressure on and time pressure to get things or an incident mitigated so you can limit the damage. And you sometimes can be putting in controls that the attackers are trying to get past, right there at the time, and it can get quite sensational and quite, in the trenches. So there, I've labeled those guys the warriors, because they're kind of the guys who wield the weapons and the tools to either stop the attackers or to even break in to the organization for testing purposes and to demonstrate vulnerabilities in the environment. So they're really the defenders and the guys with the weapons. Now the critics is a little less sensational. These guys look at an environment or a system, and just so you know, I haven't changed slides yet. I'm just doing an intro. The critics are looking at an environment or a system or a project or a third party, and they're asking them to adhere to certain requirements, which is really a checklist to say, do you match up to our standard for security? And I'll work through how we do that in this live session as well. So those guys look at what's in place and criticize or become critics and find the gaps. And then they need to assess the risk of those gaps and look for really sensible and pragmatic solutions. All right. So that's kind of the intro to this live sessions. It's warriors and critics. Now, in this next slide, this should be familiar from the last live session, and this is where this webinar kind of fits in to the bigger picture. So we had the introduction kind of and the groundwork last week, and now over the coming weeks we will cover both the warriors, the critics. Halfway through we'll swap over to the critics, and then next week we'll do the visionaries. And the visionaries will be talking about the controls that we need to put in place, the forward-thinking controls that we need to have to protect the environment. So let's dive into the warriors, the technical operations, those who are testing, monitoring, and handling incidents. So let's also, before we dive into that, just go through threat scenarios. Okay, so a lot of these, a lot of the way we communicate with the business are through these threat scenarios. Like I mentioned last week, I want to make sure you're very clear. If there's one thing that you need to go away with as a security manager or wanting, an aspiring security manager, into the next role, it's to understand how to communicate with the business. And I believe that this is the best way to do it, through a threat scenario that is a sentence with three factors. We have the actor, the negative impact, and an asset. Okay, and that is how the business interprets and understands security. It's our interface into the business. So the actor could be a bad guy, external, internal, malicious, or it could even be incidental, an accident or something like that. Negative impact could be exposure of data, unauthorized access to data, loss of service, even destruction of data. And then also the asset is maybe confidential information or a system or a privileged function or something that the business relies on to do its day-to-day function. Okay, so that's it. Those three things: an actor, a negative impact, and an asset. That's very key. And I would encourage you all to know those off by heart, certainly for the exam at the end of the course. All right, let's dive into security testing. So the technical operations side of the business, of the side of the security practice, is required to be able to demonstrate that there are problems, right? So without that capability, if you have a security practice without the capability of saying, hey, look, there's a problem here, you actually have a limited ability to prove anything. And you can there's two sides of the spectrum, right? So you could at one point say, just take our word for it, there's a problem. If if the security team says so, you must do, and they just have to take your word for it. Now that's okay if you have 100% trust in the organization, but what's better is if you go to the other side of the spectrum and say, we won't actually ask you to fix anything unless we can demonstrate that there is a problem. Okay, and that is technically challenging to do, because you're basically saying that we will demonstrate we have the capability to demonstrate these problems. But somewhere in the middle, there is a balance where you can demonstrate the majority of the problems and have that technical capability in your security practice to be able to do that. Okay, so that takes a fair bit of IT and network background. Having people in your organization have a natural ability to do these things, to script, to demonstrate those vulnerabilities through exploits, to really understand it. All right, so what are we looking for when we're scanning or security testing? The first thing we're doing is we're generally port scanning, because this is how incidents occur. This is how the actors or the malicious parties break into the network. First, they come over the network. There's three ways really that are dominant for getting into a network. One is through internet accessible systems like websites and all that sort of stuff, so exposed systems. The other's through wireless networks, and finally through phishing. And if you think about it, they're kind of three of the interfaces we have with the outside world. Wireless, because you can get to it from a public location, usually outside the premises of the office. Internet accessible systems like websites and other systems, because they are connected to the internet with high exposure. And thirdly, our staff who are the target of emails. They interface with the outside world on a regular basis. You think about all those areas in your business that interface or have inputs or outputs to untrusted environments or untrusted parties. They're the ways that your organization will be attacked. So those three areas: the staff, the being able to be phished and emailed, and your internet accessible systems, and your wireless networks. Now, port scanning is one of those things that we need to do to ensure that the systems that are attached to the internet aren't exposed, right? So what are we looking for? We're looking for internet exposed systems, insecure systems that are have vulnerabilities, admin interfaces on the internet. That's a definite no-no. There's no reason for that server to have SSH open to the world. There's no need for that appliance to have its web admin interface open to the world. we don't allow that to happen. We're looking for admin interfaces. We're looking for insecure services. There's no need for organizations these days to have telnet unless there's a massively legacy environment, and hopefully you can use some intermediate device to get to telnet. FTP, even these days, it's still quite popular, but maybe you can move to SFTP or FTPS, and then there's a remote shell there, and obviously you don't want that. So port scanning allows you to find these services that you would rather not have in the environment. Sometimes it also helps you find rats and trojans, and enables you to, like I think it was NetBus was sitting on port 1234. There's other services that if you see these funny ports, then you might have a look into it. That's what port scanning is for. We also want to find legitimate services. So if you're thinking about the IP addresses that are exposed to the internet, you would scan them first. You would look for admin interfaces. You'd get those closed down. You'd scan it again, make sure they're all gone. Then you'd look at the websites and maybe email systems and FTP systems that are still open, and maybe DNS systems as well. And you would say, these are legitimate services. These are services that need to be exposed to the internet. And you keep it at that, just at those things. And maybe you can set up port scanning to let you know if anything changes, if other services open up without your organization's knowledge. Now, once you have those legitimate services, then you might enter those into regular vulnerability scanning to make sure that they don't deprecate or they don't age in a way that makes them vulnerable. And that's the next thing we'll cover in port scanning. Now, the tool of choice with port scanning, it's kind of ubiquitous. It's what everyone uses, is Nmap. Nmap has an amazing amount of flexibility. It can do all sorts of port scans. It can do SYN scans. It can do TCP Connect scans. It can do Xmas tree scans, which is mostly about putting all the flags on the TCP packet and seeing what comes back. It can do ACK scans, so confuse the system and see. It can also do versioning, so it can grab banners of the services and it can try and work out what operating system that you are running. So it can tell you all this information, and it is very helpful. I encourage everyone who's responsible for a network to scan their external systems to make sure they know what systems are open to the internet. It's a very important thing to do. Now, Nmap also has this scripting engine, the Nmap scripting engine. There's quite a few clever people who have put together scripts that allow you to test for vulnerabilities and even exploits as well. So it's kind of edging into the Metasploit territory. But Nmap, I highly recommend getting used to that as a key security tool. Okay. So then from there, we move on to vulnerability scanning, and you're expecting your technical resource to be able to do this. Obviously, as a cybersecurity manager or understanding cybersecurity management, if you're part of a small team, you might have to help out in this. But if you're part of a larger team, the hope is that you would have resources that could perform this for you. The vulnerability scan is obviously in two levels. You can either do it at the network level, which is just really looking at operating system vulnerabilities, with their network stack and things like that. And then you can also look at the application level, which is more than likely web applications, right? And there's all sorts of tools that you can use for that as well. So obviously we still need to use Nmap also for vulnerability scanning. If you want to stay on the open source path, then you can use OpenVAS with the community freely available signature for vulnerabilities. Then you can step up into proprietary software and use Nessus. Nessus is kind of like the, I would say, in my experience, the de facto, although guys like Qualys are kind of hot on their heels. And there's also, and you might want to have different vulnerability scanners just to see what each of them give you. Because what happens is that the vulnerability scanner can give you a report, but then you should really need to go and validate all of the results that you get from that report. And having another vulnerability assessment tool to be able to show you those things is good as well. Now on the website side, OWASP Zap is also very good. That's a free software. You can point it at a website. It acts like a proxy. You make your browser go through OWASP Zap. You then browse the site, and then you go click and do a spider with Zap, and then you ask it to do a vulnerability scan that comes back with all sorts of information about SQL injection or cross-site scripting and things like that. Very helpful. I've got a note there called hosted versus local down where my cursor is. And what I mean by that is that sometimes you might want to use a hosted version of something like Qualys out on the internet to do your regular scanning and send reports in. And that's always good to do. You just got to make sure your systems are open to allow that if you are doing it from behind firewalls or something like that. You can also set up a local instance so you can scan internally. It's very important to do this. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. Don't underestimate the amount of time it takes to collate and collect the results from a fleet of thousands of computers and servers if you're in any size of organization. And I would recommend always going for the criticals and highs beyond anything else. You just go for the absolute minimum first, the stuff that is, that an attacker would use and just walk into the system easily. That stuff has got to go. All right. So focus on the critical vulnerabilities, then the high vulnerabilities, and also think about which hosts are exposed. So if you have critical vulnerability on an exposed host, then go for that critical vulnerability first rather than the critical vulnerability internal, because obviously your exposure and attack surface is much smaller inside. If you also have a critical vulnerability that sits behind an authenticated website, then maybe do the one that's unauthenticated rather than the one that is authenticated. What I mean by that is if your website is restricted to a limited user base of people who have to log in with their username and password and then they get access to the vulnerability, then that is a much smaller exposure. So keep those things in mind. But this takes time. There are whole teams dedicated to vulnerability management in some organizations, and it is time consuming. And then there's whole teams involved in upgrading and patching systems. And what I will say is that if you are going down a vulnerability management path, then it is much easier to have frequent patching than infrequent patching. When your systems get to a certain age, you no longer have the option of incremental upgrades or incremental updates. You might be going from a major version to another major version, and that brings in all sorts of different issues around compatibility and testing. So it's best to keep those systems upgraded. So vulnerability management, the best vulnerability management is a path well trodden, and that is a difficult thing to get resources for because there is no obvious benefit and it's costly. If you let it go for too long, then you end up with a vulnerability debt and you have to pay that debt off somewhere. So, and somehow, I hope that's clear. All right, on to the next slide. So then we've gone scanning, we've gone vulnerability scanning, port scanning, then vulnerability scanning. Now we're on to penetration testing. And there's two major functions to penetration testing. It is really application exploits or guessing or cracking a password. Okay, if you're able to get credentials, then you're in. If you're able to exploit an application and get a shell, then you're in. Obviously, you want to do this for both internal environments and external environments. External environments obviously be a little bit more frequent because they're so highly exposed. Now, there's a whole methodology to penetration testing because you're not just doing a vulnerability scan now. Everyone's pretty comfortable with vulnerability scanning these days. It's only the very rare legacy environment that would really be bothered by vulnerability scanning or fall over. I have a memory of doing IT support when I worked in London many years ago, and I did a port scan of the network to find out which systems were online and which weren't, or to get information about them. And every time I did that, people would start to complain that the printers weren't working. There was 2 printers on this floor. I thought, that's pretty strange. And I did another vulnerability scan. The printers would stop working again. And I'd just reboot them. They'd work again. What I realized was that the Jet Direct cards in them would fall over if they were scanned on all the ports. Things used to be that kind of fragile, but they're no longer like that, really. Usually after the first couple of scans, everyone gets comfortable with it and you can move on. But with penetration testing, it's a different story. You're actually going to have an impact on the environment. Exploits are generally kind of a bit hit and miss. Obviously, you're making use of a malfunction of software rather than an actual function of the software. So it's really just sometimes a bit of a stab in the dark as to how the application will react. Some exploits work flawlessly all the time and are really reliable, but some may cause a blue screen or may not work at all. And are a bit unreliable. And that's because you're not actually making use of official functionality, obviously. With password guessing, it's different as well. If you start to guess passwords on an application and it's got lockout, and you have all the usernames and you rifle through all the usernames and you manage to lock all the usernames out of the application, then that's going to have an impact the next morning. So we have to think about the impact we're going to have on the application when we're doing our penetration testing. Now, the tools that resources who would be doing this, obviously, there are a whole bucket load of open source tools. The premier collection of tools is Kali Linux. They generally grab everything and put it together, which is a really good service for the community, and it helps everyone to do their job. There's also Metasploit. There's the paid version and the community version. This is a really good tool for using exploits to get into systems. I've used it mostly when demonstrating or breaking into systems that are infected with very old viruses. So it's not uncommon, in networks to land on a network and you'll find that something like Configure or Spybot are very old, or Nachi, very old viruses and worms that are sitting on the network. Just a couple of machines, not too much. Sometimes people take a machine out of the cupboard, plug it into the network. It hasn't been plugged in for a couple of years, and it was infected and missed all the cleaning up and updates and things like that. So, and that can be the case for orphaned machines as well, machines that are put on the network to do a certain function. Those building management systems or CCTV systems always used to run on XP and be vulnerable and never patched and never have viruses because they didn't want to interfere with the video. So I have in the past had to break into those machines, and I think on the MSO867, that was a very good one that Configure went over. That was an easy one to use with Metasploit. Metasploit had a really good module for that. And also the, I think it's MSO411, which was the LSAS vulnerability. That was also a very reliable one. But my favorite was the MSO3, and this is going back a while, MSO327, I think. And that was an RPC one, and that would work all the time. And now we're going back for, I think, 12, 13 years of not patching, and kind of showing my age in the industry a bit. But that's what Metasploit's good for, is being able to break in. You could, there's this Meterpreter as well, which is a set of tools that can be loaded up onto the machine that you're targeting, and used really to break further into the network. So there is plenty of tools. There's OWASP Zap as well that I mentioned in the vulnerability scanning that can also be used to exploit and to try things out on the website. THC Hydra, the hacker's choice, is a tool to guess passwords. So pretty much any interface you can think of, an RDP or a SMB, the server message block, the Windows shares, or a website, THC Hydra has the ability to automate logging into those things. So you give it a list of usernames and you give it a word list, and it will go and try as much as possible. So that's a really handy tool definitely for admin interfaces. when you know the admin password and you have an idea of what a bad password might be, I would recommend the top, I think there's a few of those, a top 500 bad password list. There are a few of those on the internet. Give those a go with THC Hydra. Then there's also John the Ripper, which is more for offline attacks. So this idea of online password attacks and offline password attacks. An online attack is using the user interface to guess the password, which is obviously going to be slower because you're doing it over the network and you're confined by the parameters of the application. So if the application only lets someone try 4 times an hour or 4 times every half an hour to log in, so after the 4th failed attempt you're locked out for a little while, then it's going to be very slow going. On the flip side is an offline attack where you've actually been able to either sniff the hash of the password or you have a whole bunch of hashes of the password and you are able to crack it. And you get a beefy machine, you get a word list, or you do a brute force from which is basically going through every iteration of the password might be, and then you just go at it and you break the password. So that's the tools that we use in the penetration testing side. Now, this is obviously all 3 of these slides could have a lecture or a course based on them together. So I'm not diving into too much detail. We don't have the luxury of going through all of this in a lot of detail, but there's more to it. But what I'm trying to give you is a flavor of what you need to know or what capabilities you need in your security practice to make sure that the cybersecurity is managed correctly. All right. Now, just a little side note on secure development. I think I've only got 1 slide on this. Yes, I do. So websites, there's a difference between websites that are kind of purchased off the shelf, like you get a packaged bit of software, you load it up and you customize the content, the standard content management systems. You build your website and then you publish it. If there's a vulnerability with that stuff, you go to the vendor and you say, hey, look, we found out, we read your advisory, please give us the updates. You apply the updates and you're resolved. And that's how you manage the vulnerabilities. It's different if you're writing your website yourself. If you've got a bunch of JSP or PHP or Perl programmers that are putting together your website and are doing it from scratch, building it on the Linux box, on Apache, on Tomcat, whatever, on Nginx or something, then you are requiring them or you're trusting them to build the software securely. The primary thing you need in that case is to make sure everyone is trained on web application security. So number 1 thing, they need to make sure they do input validation. That's the key item. But the bigger picture is they need to understand about the OWASP top 10, the OWASP top 10. Now you can kind of gauge the understanding of web application security of your developers by asking that simple question: are you familiar with OWASP? And if they say no, then there is an urgent need to train them in OWASP and to make sure they know what they're doing and to regularly train them in OWASP. So what I'm saying here is that you need to have a security built into the development lifecycle for those web application programmers. So the first thing is getting the staff training. Get them to know what secure development is. Second thing is once they've developed something up, once they've coded something and they're ready to submit it into UAT or something, get it peer reviewed. So have someone in the development team who knows about security and understands what insecure coding looks like or things that would be a problem, and review it manually. And that may sound like a big issue, and at first it will be, but when they get used to it, they'll be able to actually train each other and be able to bounce off each other and get better quality code. It's highly encouraged. The third thing is you can have some automatic tools that do static analysis or dynamic analysis on the application itself to look for common coding errors. They're done at different stages. static analysis a bit early, and there's a whole raft of tools that allow you to do this. Some open source, some proprietary. The proprietary ones are quite expensive, but again, it comes down to how much you value the security of your website. Then finally, or secondly, or the second last thing is a vulnerability scan. So obviously, you would want to scan the application, if it's a web application, before it goes into production. So hopefully you have a pre-production environment. It's all set up like it would be in production, and you hit it with a vulnerability scanner and then a web application vulnerability scanner to make sure you don't have obvious problems just lying there in wait for when it is published. And then you do your penetration testing as well. And you might do that in pre-prod or actually in the production environment out of hours. But the whole idea is that you need to be able to fit these things into the application or the software development life cycle that is existing in your organization, and getting those things in and making it a part of their cycle and ensuring that there are checkpoints that are checked off by somebody other than the developers before they actually publish into production will allow you to have some control over it. Now, we will discuss web application firewalls and other controls in the next live session when we're talking about visionaries and leaders, where we talk about the program. But for this, it is part of the security operations because there is a technical aspect to this, ongoing technical aspect to review these things. So hopefully your technical operations staff members have good scripting skills and actually can see where input validation or there's problem with authentication has been included. Okay, that's software development. We're going to dive now into log monitoring. Now this stuff's exciting and it can absorb hours of your time. So warning for those who are about to embark on week 2 exercises, I highly encourage you to persist. Those who are less technical and will find themselves doing having a steep learning curve, I encourage you to dive into the forum. There will be people to help you out. Other students will help you out. And they will assist you. There is some good instruction there. Go back to the instruction, fumble your way through it, try things, rebuild things, and have a good go. It is a really good exercise what we have included in this course to really give you an idea of the basics of getting a system like this together. And when you do that, technically and practically, you kind of start to understand the mechanics behind doing this in a real live environment. So, and the penny will drop. So it's really important to give it a go. And I'm excited to see how many of you are able to get their logs into our central Greylog server, which is the tool of choice in this case. So, and I'll explain it briefly. The exercise is to set up your own Greylog server and to configure it in a way that monitors for failed login attempts to its underlying operating system, and then to get those failed login logs to our central Greylog server and see them in the stream. We've set that all up for you to see that in there. And one of those things that I can check on a daily basis is how many streams or how many feeds of information, that's called sources, how many sources have appeared in our Greylog server. So I'm really looking forward to all of you fairly quickly being able to do that over the week and seeing that rise and seeing what comes out of it. It should be really interesting. So with log monitoring, and you'll see this kind of take shape in the exercise, we have it for 2 main purposes. One is alerting when bad things happen, like when we've had a break-in or there is an intrusion. We want to know about it, and that's a key reason. But another reason is for investigation, because obviously our alerting is not always perfect. We want it to be, but it's just not possible. So when things do happen, we need to be able to investigate. We need the evidence there to find out what has happened and how to how to progress and how to make sure that doesn't happen again. The way we do that is we centralize log files. We take them from all sorts of places and we monitor for anomalies. We need to understand, and this is something I learned early in my cybersecurity journey, is that in an environment, it's good to know and have a sense of what is normal. And there's this concept of network peace. If you are looking at certain events in the environment for the first time, you don't know if they're normal or not. Okay, so this is a key point. If you have an incident and you take logs and you've never seen those logs before, then you don't know, you can't differentiate from what is happening on a daily basis and what is new and what is symptomatic of the breach. If you, and you'll be chasing shadows, and I've had that before personally. But if you have dashboards and you have visualizations of this data and you have metrics and previous data to refer against to, you can have a better chance of knowing what is normal on your network. Maybe it's normal for there to be 300 invalid user authentication attempts in an hour because that's just how one application works. Maybe that's proper. Maybe it's supposed to work like that. But if you see it for the first time in intrusion, you'll go, whoa, 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 there's a whole lot of invalid user, and you'll chase that rabbit hole and end up down in an area you don't want to be in because it's a red herring. So it's important to know all these things and to get a sense of what's going on in your environment. You can only do that by monitoring those logs and looking at anomalies and understanding what network peace looks like and getting to a place of network peace. So maybe it's not right that those 300 invalid user attempts, they're not causing a problem, but they're an error, and maybe they need to go. Maybe they're causing an inefficiency somewhere else for somebody else, not so much malicious, but maybe using up resources. So that's really important to understand from a monitoring perspective. Who knows what's going on in your network and who can tell you what's normal and what's not? And it's that intellectual property that is really important for log monitoring. We also want to simulate attacks, right? So if say you get all your logging working, it's all in one central spot, you manage to get everyone to agree and put it all in, put those logs all in a good place you can search and visualize very, very easily. Then you want to test your thresholds, right? So you may say, I'm only interested if there's 100 failed authentication attempts. So you set that alert, and then all of a sudden you get 300 alerts because all these failed authentication attempts happening anyway. So you go, oh no, maybe I want something different, and then the idea is just to run up something like THC Hydra, which is an automated password guessing tool, point it at your application and run it, and then see what it looks like in the logs and set your thresholds around that. The worst thing you can do is have alerts for everything that you need to respond to. You'll get numb with alerts. Have them at a reasonable level and always tweak and refine them, because if you have that alert fatigue, when the real alert comes through, you may miss it, and it's really important to find that out. So simulate those attacks, get your thresholds right for alerts, and learn from incidents. When you have a breach, when you have somebody who's made it into your network, they did it somehow. They were able to do it, and look for clues and the breadcrumbs to include in your monitoring. And this is most important when you find gaps in your log aggregation. Not every log is going to your centralized log server. And if it is, it's a pretty good effort. But if you find gaps in your logging, make sure you learn from your incidents to include those in. All right, on to the next slide. Now, where do we get logs from? Well, we two main areas. We want security equipment, and we want information from general applications and servers and network appliances. Oh, sorry. I almost sneezed. I was trying to find the mute button so I didn't blow all your ears out, but it's gone away. How unsatisfactory. All right, so two main areas from security equipment, so your actual controls and environment information. So security equipment, one of the key spots, and it's kind of boring, but antivirus is a really good indicator of where things aren't working right in your organization. If you have lax controls, one of the first things you'll find that pops up are viruses. So getting a good idea of where those viruses are is really important. Stamping out those viruses, even if they're not causing you a problem right now, is really important as well. It's not good to have viruses resident and persistent. Make sure you get rid of them. So antivirus is a really good place to start for that centralized logging. So get that going into your logging server. Then also intrusion prevention. Hopefully you've got port scanning, monitoring on intrusion prevention systems, and you also are looking for actual attacks. This is great information to get into your log systems. And with antivirus, I'll also say something else about antivirus. Antivirus also gives you a lot of information about users to machines. That's not always easy to come by. When you have a machine that is behaving badly, you can, if it's on a different network, maybe you can't interrogate. If it's on a different AD, maybe it won't tell you who's logged into it, and you don't have credentials there. But if you're getting your logs from antivirus, usually they'll tell you the user and the machine, and then you can use that as a database to look up who actually owns it, and you can call them up and say, pull the plug on that machine, it's got a problem. So where antivirus is not just good for virus information, it's also good for machine information. Yeah, that really is. Intrusion prevention, we want the information coming from there. I said port scanning. The reason why you want port scanning information is usually when somebody lands on your network, the first thing they want to do is look around. And the way you look around is by shining a light around the different services. And the way you do that is you port scan to find out what's open. So one of the first things they do for enumerating targets when in an environment. And you also want those particular attacks. Web application firewalls are good as well. If you've got a concerted targeted attack, it should pop up on the radar, and then you can take action like blocking that IP address. Data leak protection is also good. Vulnerability scanners, not all of these do it, but some of them do. They put vulnerability information as a log item so that you can graph very easily how many. If you're having a kind of scheduled vulnerability scans, then you can say, all right, we found 50 vulnerabilities this week. We've now only found 40 the next week, so we've decreased the vulnerabilities by 10. It's a really easy way to keep track of all the vulnerabilities. Firewalls, it's controversial. Firewalls, I actually don't want everything from a firewall. If you think about it and you grab all the deny logs from your firewall that is external facing, then you'll just get flooded with information you don't really want. It could be handy later down the track if you want to assess if someone's been attacking you for a while or something like that. But generally speaking, if it's exposed to the internet, it's going to get hacked and scanned and all that sort of stuff. So those deny lists aren't very helpful. What you definitely want is firewall admin logs. So people who are logging onto the firewall, making changes, make sure you get the user admin logs out of that, because they're crucial things on your crucial elements on your network that you don't want unauthorized access into. Anti-spam, you want the logs from anti-spam because you will need to find out who sent emails. And this is basically just getting SMTP logs as well. Very good for investigation to find out how a breach occurred, how an incident occurred. And proxy web filter. It's a lot of information, but you certainly want those things that the malicious sites that have been trying to access. You think about a phishing campaign, the email comes and lands on the person's workstation. They jump onto the email and then they click on the link. You want your proxy to tell you if they clicked on that link or not, or if they've provided credentials back through email to get the SMTP logs. Environment information, that's really helpful. DHCP server information is really helpful for lookup. If you have an incident, you're investigating it, you might like to think, so you have a machine that's been plugged into the network and is trying to infect everyone else, DHCP will tell you when they're assigned that IP address and also which floor they plugged into. Very handy to know if they've been moving around. You've got a history of their IP addresses that they've acquired and obtained through the organization if they're moving from floor to floor. DNS servers are good to get information from because most phishing and attack and other attacks require the lookup of DNS entries. So keeping DNS requests logged will give you an idea of when the attack occurred, and will also give you a better chance of identifying malicious requests and closing them down. Unix and Windows servers, you want the authentication attempts from that. You get someone trying to break into Windows or Unix box, you want to know about it. Getting the same from routers and switches, so if someone's trying to authenticate crazily to a router or a switch because they're trying to get into or break the username, you don't want that to go unnoticed. Break the password, I mean. And then finally, authentication servers. So hopefully your Unix, Windows, and routers and switches are all pointing to a central authentication server. You want those logs to know when people have logged in, logged out, when users are created and deleted, when groups are modified, when administrators when generic accounts are used. Make a note of that one if you're looking at thresholds. If it is a good idea not to have generic accounts used at all in the environment, everyone should be able to be identifiable by a username that is unique to them. All right, so that's the log monitoring sources to think about. There are many others that you might take, all the way from voice systems to even physical log-on, log-off systems where people swipe their cards, things like that. So all these things are good in the form of logs, and the trick is getting a system that is able to do that within budget, and I believe the thing used in the exercise is going to be good for that. So on to the next slide. The tools that just a collection of them to get you going. Some of the major ones. The one that I've been that I've suggested for this exercise because it's so easy to set up is Greylog. It's very basic. If you're talking about just security monitoring and just having thresholds, alerts on certain thresholds of just individual occurrences, this is what you need. Just the basics. If you were setting up a central logging environment, this could be just the way to go. It doesn't need too many resources. You just set it up, you get logs going into it, you set some thresholds, you do some configuration, and away you go. It's a good way to start. You then can think about using something a little bit more technical, but also still free, is the ELK stack, which is Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Elasticsearch is the database, the unstructured database behind Greylog as well. But Elasticsearch is the database in ELK. Logstash is the log conveyor or communicator. So it's the log aggregator. It will take logs from all sorts of places and push them into Elasticsearch. And Kibana is the visualization package, so commonly known as the ELK stack in the industry. Splunk is a good option, but it kind of got expensive with volume. So if you're taking a lot of logs, and maybe it's not a great idea. A lot of people use Greylog and ELK to take in all the data and then refine it and send it into Splunk to keep their licensing costs down. Then there's ArcSight, which is the kind of the HP one, which is I guess the preferred vendor from a couple of years ago. Very prominent, very massive deployments, highly can be very specialized, many features, has got very good correlation, has got very many inputs from different systems, and it's a good package, but obviously can become a beast, and you need someone with specific skills to be able to run that. Logarithm is getting good press as well. So these systems are important to know. These types of SIEM applications or security monitoring applications, but I will hesitate to say always go for the magic quadrant items. What I would suggest is to go for the package that provides what you need, provides 90% of the functionality that you need to get going. When you get something like Greylog or Elk up and running, you'll notice that it doesn't do everything you need it to do, but everything you want it to do. But think about it and think, does it do everything I need it to do? You need to have a practical approach, a practical approach to security and to cybersecurity, so that you don't overwhelm the business with cost. It's this whole mantra of making sure that you are only doing the security that is necessary for the business, and getting the systems that are right for it. So I would start off basic and get more and more complex and build a case for the next level up as you go. Right, they're the tools for logging and monitoring. Now, logging and monitoring is really important for all sorts of things to do with security operations. We've gone through the scanning and testing. We've gone through the code review, and we've done the logging and monitoring. Now we're doing the incident handling. So when you're doing all these things, hopefully you don't have incidents, but incident handling is key to a security practice. Incident handling is one of the only times where security guys get to be heroes. So when your business is faced with an incident that could cripple it, and to be honest, it can actually do that, then the security guys can lend a hand. They can dive in on that bridge call. They can provide the advice. They can run the incident. They can make sure that the vulnerability or the problem or the issue is resolved, so they don't have a repeat incident. And this is the key for incident handling, is to make sure you leverage that incident and study it enough to understand why it occurred and make sure it doesn't happen again. Now, the process we go through, this is based on the GCIH, that I'm a big fan of that certification. It kind of forms the basis from my incident handling experience. The process is this 6-step process. You have preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. Now, preparation is all about getting the plans in place, right? It's about getting the environment and the documentation ready to ensure that your team is ready to handle the incident. Identification is about when the team has been notified of an incident and when they can confirm that an incident has occurred, and they can declare an incident. Say, I declare an incident, we've identified it, you give it a rating, is it high, medium, or low? What kind of resources do you throw at it? We then go to containment. So we're trying to stop the breach from spreading, or the incident from spreading, whether that be like unauthorized access to data, or somebody's broken into a machine, a server, or there's a virus spreading. How do you contain it? How do you stop it from spreading immediately? Once you've stopped it from spreading, then you've got to clean it away. You've got to get rid of the instances of the virus. You've got to get rid of the effects of the breach, and you've got to get rid of all of the extra information that is allowed unauthorized access from around the place. We then recover the environment and the systems, and then we do our lessons learned. Okay, so recovery is all about getting the systems back into the shape they were before the incident, so the business can use them. That's key. The business has to be able to validate that it's recovered to that stage and the recovery is over. Then we do lessons learned, and lessons learned is all about writing a report, understanding the incident in depth, in serious depth, and then providing recommendations. And that means providing short-term recommendations that should occur pretty much within a week, and long-term recommendations that'll apply strategic controls to ensure that that same class of attack doesn't happen again. Okay, so that's the basis of incident handling, is this process. Now, just a quick discussion on incidents versus events. Obviously, not everything that occurs in an organization is an incident. There's events as well. Now, an incident is kind of harm or intent of harm, a violation of a security control or policy, privileges greater than authorized, exposed assets or privileged functions that are exposed to unauthorized parties. Okay, that they're key incidents. Deliberate or inadvertent violations of policies and controls in a nutshell. An event might just be an occurrence uh, of something that happens on a system that occurs regularly and periodically, or a system failure because of hardware or software faults or something like that. But there's no malicious intent or exposure to unauthorized parties, right? So there's this nuance of malicious intent included in incidents. Rarely is there any so with an event, there's no hint of malicious intent really, but in an incident, somewhere along the line, some malicious actor has been a party to it, or is threatened to be a party to it. Okay, and that's the difference. And it's hard to kind of you get to know those as you move through more incidents. You get to realize what is an incident, and really it comes down to should it just be handled by IT, or does information security need to get involved to ensure this doesn't happen again? All right. Now, examples are client contact database ends up on a published Google Docs spreadsheet. That is an incident. That's a security incident because there's a possibility of unauthorized access. Backup tape is lost in transit, or that's definitely a security incident because backup tapes have enormous amounts of data on them and you don't want it falling into the wrong hands. A backup process fails. Now, the assumption there is it just fails because it didn't work properly. That is just an event. System administrator creates a new user. Well, that could just be an event. Obviously, there's some circumstantial factors to this. If it's created and if someone's created a new user when they weren't supposed to, obviously that's an incident. But if it's just because it's an authorized request, and that's an event. A line manager approves a direct report's expenses. Now that's just an event as well. The expectation is that's all above board. Obviously, if those expenses aren't above board, then that is fraud, and there could be a security incident that needs to be investigated there. Then there is the incident response plan, right? So we've got this process where we do preparation, uh, uh, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. And to make that all work together, you need it in an incident response plan. Now, what I've done here is I've put down the standard headings, which would give you a good kind of template for putting one of these things together yourself. So first you have a purpose. So you describe why you have an incident response plan in the business. And remember, all of the documents that we produce for information security should be aimed at an audience, right? So who's going to read this? It's not going to be everyone in the organization. It may be some technical staff, but mostly it's going to be security people. So you are allowed to put your security terminology in here and to make sure that it's clear what needs to happen, all right? Then we have sponsorship. So we have this is the purpose, this is why it's being done, and these are the people who are supporting it, which is generally the executive team. And then you go through the contents. We have a process overview. We have an identification, containment, eradication, recovery. There's the process we're talking about. We then have lessons learned and a contact list. Then you want to publish the plan. So it should be made available to everyone in the organization if they need to see it. That is with the caveat that you don't have any sensitive information in the plan. I wouldn't recommend putting sensitive information in the plan. Contact lists generally aren't sensitive, even if you have government agency contacts in there and things like that. But the idea is that it's not it might be confidential, so only those in the organisation see it. You shouldn't publish it outside of the organisation, of course, but you can generally it's for the security team anyway. And then you have to test the plan, all right? So sit around a table and test it. This is also done if you happen to have a security incident, just run through the test plan anyway. All right. Now the incident report. This is a major thing. I get on to my soapbox about this because the report is basically your opportunity to leverage the incident. And I don't mean in a negative way. You're not kind of holding people for ransom. You're saying, we had an incident, now we have to do all this stuff. We've got your attention. I'm going to make the most of it. And then there is a little bit of cynical statement to say you never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, in some cases it's true, but in all honesty, if the business does not learn from its mistakes with allowing an incident to occur, it's because the security staff have not pointed out where they need to alter things. And this is what the incident report is about. It's not just about documenting what has occurred. It's about putting it in a compelling way, or putting the sequence of events in a compelling way, so that the executive team or senior management understand the gravity of the situation and make an informed decision, right? So you're educating not only your security staff, you're also encouraging the discussion and questions within your organization about the incident, and you're also transferring knowledge, right? So it's all about that education piece. And I'm going to say that if you do not write an incident report for your incident, then you only know half of the details. When you go start writing an incident report, you will realize that what's in your head is not complete, and you need to go and get more information, and things will come to light that you never kind of imagined, unless it's a very simple incident. When you put the timeline together, for instance, you kind of need to, things start to fall into place, how things happen. You start getting an idea of intent. You start getting an idea of the damage that it can cause. It also helps to refine the process. If you've found things during the incident that didn't work with your incident response process, documenting the incident in the report will help you do that, and you can put a recommendation to update your incident response plan to include additional steps. Maybe you forgot someone who needed to be contacted. We then have preparation as a major factor. When the big incident does occur, you want to be prepared. You want to know straight away what to do and how to behave. And also you need these things for compliance. PCI and 27001 do require incident response plans, and for regular testing or periodic testing anyway. All right, so that's the technology operations, the security, the technical operations, the security warriors, the cybersecurity warriors that we have in our team. Those guys look after breaking into systems, ensuring the code is right, monitoring for system intrusions, and then handling them when they do occur. Now we're moving on to, and I'm aware of the time, we should be able to cover it. And we'll stop actually for a question, Margie, before I dive into the next section. If there's a couple of questions that we can take, that'd be great.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Awesome. Okay. So I've just sorted them. Um, this might actually be actually I'll email you. Yes, someone has just requested a list of blogs that they can use to familiarize themselves with the tools that you've recommended.
Oh, right. Yeah, sure.
Um,
We can do that.
so sorry, there are a lot of good questions here. Um, For Web SSL certificates, what's your recommendation? I.e., to update the certificate before it expires, say 24 hours beforehand, or wait for it to expire? And what happens when a vulnerability has been released affecting specific software from vendors, but a patch is not yet available or is not being tested,
Yeah,
etc.?
sure. Okay, all right. So the first one, SSL, I would say you would renew them well in advance, more than 24 hours. Depending on the size of your organization and the red tape you have in your organization, it can take you a while to get change requests in to swap those certificates out. So leave plenty of lead time, a couple of weeks, maybe even a month, to make sure you get the new SSL certificates in. Certainly don't wait till they've expired. You'll get the nasty error message for all your customers. Certainly if it's public facing or customer facing, then you'll want to make sure you've got it refreshed well in advance. The second question was about when you've got a vulnerability that's been disclosed without a patch being available for from a vendor. Hopefully you have the opportunity, or there is an option to have a workaround or shut down a service, or provide some additional protection without the patch. Often those things do exist. If it's that serious and it's an exposed service, then you might have to take the option of taking the service offline, and also obviously it depends on business criticality, or limiting who can go to the service. Certainly include monitoring, find out what the side effects of that vulnerability being exploited are, and try and monitor for symptoms of that occurring, and have that as a backup as well. But hopefully, if something is that critical and it's quite easy to exploit, then you will get a patch very soon from the vendor. And if you don't happen to get a patch from the vendor, maybe it's time to start thinking about alternate technologies. So there's a whole raft of options for you, but it's a way of mitigating as much as possible. All right, Argy, I think I answered that one. If we want to move on to the next one.
Yep. So maybe one more question and then we can move on.
Yep, yep.
So there used to be some mention in the media about certain tools in Kali not being legal for use in Australia. Is this still the case for some of the tools that we need to be aware of?
I'm actually not aware of that. I didn't think that was still the case. Are you talking about? Um, I wonder if that references to wireless scanning tools that go out of certain spectrum limitations, those sorts of things. But otherwise, I think it's pretty much well respected, and I certainly don't know of any agencies that are going after Kali users, like law enforcement agencies that are actually trying to track them down. And it's generally pretty well used, so I don't think you really have to worry about that. But I'll take a note to have a look into that, just in case that's something that needs to be looked at. But certainly not something I've heard about, besides the wireless tools and using them properly, yeah, and appropriately. Yeah. Okay. So that's not a very good answer, but I'll investigate.
No worries.
Yeah. All right. Well, I might move on to the next stage. This will be a little lighter. I get kind of excited about the technical operations. I've spent a lot of my career handling incidents and doing security testing and monitoring for issues. So that's pretty exciting. This next bit, where you're a critic and you do review and compliance of certain areas of the business and third parties, is uh, for some people very exciting. For those who really enjoy auditing and finding the gaps and dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and very detail-oriented people, the critics portion of the cybersecurity practice is very good. And finding one of those people in your organization to do these sorts of things is very helpful as well. So it's a different skill set than the warriors. Obviously, the warriors are quite technical. They're enthusiastic about breaking things and finding out how to fix things. The critics are more enthusiastic about ensuring all of the required controls are in place and they get accurate answers. So it's a different skill set and it's a different type of person. And it's the red square there, rounded square. All right. So when we're talking about security review, we need a criteria. Okay. You don't just. I've seen security review done in some teams where it just depends on what that individual knows about security, and they write a few emails backwards and forwards asking them questions. You can get a fairly good amount of assurance that things are being done okay that way, but you'll have different results from different people. You might miss something quite significant. So I recommend any kind of security review has a criteria, and you can get that either from your internal policies and standards, from ISO, PCI, or even maybe COBIT, if it's like a strategic level, and also from regulatory bodies, like the privacy principles, or even the information security manual that the government has for their agencies. When do you review security items, well, when things change, basically, whenever you have a change in the environment, it is an opportunity to do things less secure or to do things more securely. And if you have a checkpoint where you can have a security view, like when a project is delivered or when there is a system that is being decommissioned, then you have the opportunity to advising those people who are doing those things to do it in a secure manner. And if you get to it early, then everyone understands what they're up for and it's not late. So that's really important, is to get to security review early in the plans. If you're into projects, then at the concept level, when they're thinking about what they want to do, not necessarily how they're going to do it, but what they're going to do. Also, it's good to review periodically. Things degrade, things change. You have systems that are put in place, they have errors and outages, and people change things on the fly when they're doing a break fix. And they are and systems naturally get less and less secure. So periodically, you have to go and review them. And that means a lot of work. So it's balancing that with the time and resources that you have. Now that we have to give some thought of the depth of review, you can do things by interview. It's not super effective. Hopefully the people know exactly how their systems are configured. So interview works well when that's the case. If you have a low level of knowledge, then it's absolutely hopeless. So you need something more. Maybe look at documentation. Get evidence from the system. Ask them to run a command, say, show me the configuration of this, and get them to send it to you, and you have the evidence for it. Or then also observation, sitting with an operator and saying, how is this system configured? How is the firewall configured? Show me the network elements, all those sorts of things is also good. So think about the depth of review in your security review as well. Now, I'm just about to cough. I'm going to pour. Sorry, just went to mute for a second there to cough. So where do you get your criteria from, right? So you're about to do a review. You go, well, I don't know what to review it against. What should I check it against? Well, you can get it from various places. I really like the way that the PCI requirements are written. I think they're very, even though they're quite prescriptive, it's a very practical way of doing security. It's very clear what they want from you, and they also give a rationale. And I think that's really important to make security requirements and a security review educational as well as critical, right? So you're not only looking for gaps, but you're also looking for this process to knowledge transfer to those in your organization to make their awareness better as well. So it's got a twofold factor to it. You can also get requirements from 27002. Yes, I mean 27002. Have a look at it. 27001 is the process of information security management systems, and it's an iterative risk assessment process that has a double check on it, right? Now, 27002 is a set of requirements, in-depth requirements that you choose what is applicable and not applicable for application in 27001, right? So you can get good requirements from there as well, and they align pretty well. The only difference really, well, the major difference between PCI and ISO is PCI I think is easier to read, but ISO covers availability as well, where PCI doesn't ask you to have available systems or high availability or BCPs and things like that, because they don't mind if your systems are offline. It means less chance of credit cards being being exfiltrated. All right, so that's the difference. You can also get it from your own policies and standards. This is where I suggest you get it for anything that you're just implementing or any projects you're implementing into the environment. If you're implementing systems that handle credit cards, and obviously you want to get your requirements from PCI. If you're implementing systems that are required to be 27001 compliant, then maybe you need to get your requirements from 27002. And this whole idea of providing rationale as well is really important, right? So when you are providing requirements to someone, it's good not to just provide blank, cold requirements. And the example here is computer systems and network elements must log security events to a central logging system. This is handily on topic, right? So that's the requirement. All right, so you've got computer systems, network elements. Now, say someone's implementing 3 new servers. They're like, well, how do I do that? How do I get my computer system to log to a system? You can tell them that you've got your central grey log to send it into or something like that. Then they say, well, why do I want to do that? I mean, what's the benefit? Maybe they genuinely think that there's no security benefit in sending logs centrally. Now, this is what people do in the organization every day. They make a security decision. They decide whether something should be secure or not. Not all of us have spent years learning about security and making sure we know how to uh, address threats. We haven't all done that in the organization. Other people have much more complex specialities that they are very good at, but maybe they aren't the best at assessing technical risk or assessing security risk. So the whole idea is to give a rationale with the requirement, and it takes that decision out of their mind. They don't go, oh, I don't think that's necessary, so I won't do that. When they read the rationale, they can say they can then understand why you need the security requirement. So the rationale is, without central logging, evidence for incidents that occur may not exist, so that cause and impact can be determined, right? So that gives you an idea straight away. Well, if we don't have central logging, we may not get access to uh, events and information that will allow us to understand the cause and impact. Now, any rational person will see that that is a sensible thing to do. Now, moving on to another example, Windows systems must have Operation Up-to-Date Antivirus that performs real-time on-access scanning and weekly full disk scans. Now, this is a good requirement for Windows systems. They should all have this without exception. Um, Now, the trick there is that some people won't believe in antivirus on virtual systems because of contention with real-time scanning on many systems, all that sort of stuff. But that is the requirement, and that if you've got it in the policy, then you have to push it into the requirement. The rationale for that is that systems running Windows may become unstable or unavailable to the business if infected by malware. Now, notice what I've done there. I've actually written a threat scenario, right? So we've got an asset, systems running Windows, a negative impact, unstable, and an actor, which is the malware, right? So this is kind of you start seeing how we drive that threat scenario description into every facet, even into the review and auditing that security people do. Then we have another rationale. So maybe there's two reasons to put antivirus. There's a lot more than two reasons to put antivirus on Windows systems. Systems running Windows may allow unauthorized access to confidential and highly confidential files if infected by malware. Now that is compelling. If you have two business people who read those things, they say, well, heck yes, I want antivirus on my Windows system. And it starts to form an educational piece. Just the requirement by itself doesn't give the full picture. It's important to have the rationale. I can't drive that further. And it's all about this security practice that is sympathetic to the business and provides that discussion and that communication to the business about what the risks are. Now, this is how it would look if you had these in a whole list of security reviews. You would have a bunch of requirements down on the left-hand side. These are our two examples right here. You would have the rationale in the center column, and then you would have the status. So you might have, excuse me, you might have a whole sheet of these requirements that align with statements in your policies and standards, and you would choose which ones are relevant for the projects or for the initiatives that you are reviewing. You wouldn't give this requirement of Windows systems must have antivirus to a project that is only implementing Linux, right? That may not be appropriate, and the policy in your organization may not be to put antivirus on Linux. Some people do, and others don't, right? So maybe there's a different requirement, just have a weekly scan from a remote server or something like that. I'm not sure, but it depends on the threshold or the risk appetite of the business. But then you have this status. In this case, the requirement for centrally logging is addressed. All in-scope systems are centrally logging to securitylogs.internal.company.org with syslog. Windows systems are using nxlog agent and Guelph. So this is just some details about how it's being satisfied. And this it may seem very simple, but believe me, when you've had an issue or an incident or something that's gone on, and you need to come back into the records to see if this was mandated or applied, this bit of information is really helpful. You might even put some names in there about key people who implemented this for the status. This one is partially addressed. Windows desktops systems in virtual environments are not running real-time scan. However, the images are reinitialized every morning. There is no persistent user modifiable files. So now we're starting to think about mitigating controls. So while we may have not implemented this control, because we have the rationale, we can start to think about mitigating controls in the status that will allow us to move forward and address risk. So every time we have a status that is not addressed, we have a requirement that is not satisfied, and we have a threat scenario that is likely and plausible, right? So every time we have a gap, we have to worry about the threat scenario, right? And that's the whole thing we're doing here. We're actually trying to identify real risks. What will happen if we go forward and we haven't addressed that requirement, and that requirement is not satisfied, and we have this threat scenario? That's the whole idea. The critic is looking for the gaps in the system, and the gaps in the design, the gaps in the setup, and this is how they do it. And to have a requirement and criteria list like this means that you can be thorough about it and have it repeatable as well. Ooh, running out of time. We're almost there. So types of review, well, we do project review, and projects go through concept, design, deployment, and then, various testing. That's very high level, of course, but they're kind of the three basic steps. At concept, you have an architectural discussion at a security level, and you provide those high level security requirements. At the design level, you have that gap analysis. You see if the requirements have been satisfied. Just as I was showing you in the previous slide, this is what we're doing. We do a gap analysis. At the deployment, we then do testing. We bring in our technical person and say, hey, can you test a few of those requirements? Can you actually log on to the machine and make sure Windows is there and grab some evidence? Log onto the machine and make sure antivirus is there to make sure that we've got what we think we got, how we design it. And then we think about scope. Now we'll take a second to talk about this. Scope is a bit of an icky subject when it's talking about projects, because often projects are modifying systems that already exist. And if systems already exist, then likely they don't all match up to the requirements or satisfy all the requirements. So what you have to do is kind of very clearly define the scope of the project, or else every project will become a remediation project because of the systems that will be touching around it. Now, obviously, you use that opportunity to identify other risks that need to be addressed, but you don't slow the project down with those risks. You only identify risks for the project within the scope of the project. Any other risks that come to light around that, you take off, put it in your risk register, and make sure they're addressed at an appropriate time. If you start dragging in risks from kind of adjoining systems, you will end up sinking every project, and the projects won't come to you anymore, and the organization is likely to get a new security team. That's quite extreme, but basically that's the line you have to draw. And sometimes you have to, it's burning inside of you, we must fix that, but you've got to let it go and let the scope speak for itself, and be addressed with the project. And if there is something that is that high risk, you do a threat and risk assessment outside the project and take it up to the responsible system and business owners for them to review and decide if they want to spend money to fix it up. And that's the process you take. We also have a periodic review. Annual security review is very important across the board, very difficult to do. but hopefully you can get system owners to answer for you. And once it's done first, then they can just do iterative reviews. You want systems, you want products and environments as well. All of these things need to be reviewed, and not just individual systems, but the whole environment. And then also third parties. You interact with third parties. Every organization does. They have partners, they have customers, they have people who access their environments, people who bring systems into their environments. They may even host systems for other people. It is important to review them in a similar way. Grab some requirements together that you believe they need to comply to do business with you, and check that they're doing the right thing as well in a similar fashion as to the project review. All right, and this final pick, I think, on this one is showing, whoops, this is showing the project delivery where we had that architectural discussion where we have requirements, we have design review with a gap analysis, and then we have security testing. It's just a diagrammatic way of representing that. And then finally, this is just the last one to make sure that you have a schedule and report, right? So make sure you have a calendar for doing these reviews. Ensure non-compliant items are progressed. Be persistent with it. Don't lose sight of them. Validate your reporting with technical staff and walk the executives teams through your findings, and make sure when you find risks, register them into a risk register. And here is a list of registers that you should have while performing these risk assessments and reviews, and ensuring you have compliance, so that you have a good idea of where all the exemptions are. We might touch on this next live session because I want to discuss what the difference between a risk register and exemption register. The rest is pretty obvious, but we won't cover it tonight. I've got a couple of minutes for some questions, Margie. I hope you're all hanging in there. Good to see most of you are still here. Quite a lot of you, actually. That's good to see. Margie, if you have some questions, I'll take them now.
Yep, just had to unmute myself again.
Yeah, no problem.
So the first one, an antivirus CEO of, well, I assume AV is antivirus,
Yep.
was recently reported to admit that antivirus is only successful in preventing 40% of threats.
Yep.
Is antivirus program still relevant to security?
Oh, yes, very much so. So this is a really good question, and I thank whoever asked that, because many times you'll hear people say antivirus is dead, it doesn't protect anymore. But it still has a very important role in the organization. For one, antivirus is getting more sophisticated. Maybe it's not going as fast as the arms race, but there are other agents that act similar to antivirus that are doing a much better job, like the application whitelisting, the MD5 checking, and indicators of compromise checking, like real-time kind of snapshots and things like that. So the whole agent-based or endpoint security is still very important. And I think antivirus has gone long past just signature antivirus for a long time. Usually with your antivirus package, you get some sort of network intrusion prevention as well. You also get some host-based intrusion prevention. You also get application whitelisting, and you also get central logging of security events that come across your environment for the fully featured ones. Now, I will also say, even if it was just signature-based antivirus, it's still really important to have. Like, it's not obviously the 0 days are coming out so fast that they can't keep up with it. But think about it: when you get your environment infected by a virus and it spreads to 20 machines, you can do one of two things. You can either go and wipe all those machines because you just don't know if you've got all the virus elements off it, or you can submit a sample to your antivirus vendor where they'll create an instruction set for the antivirus software, and they'll push out the new signature file to all those computers, and it will clean the antivirus for you. So antivirus may not be picking it up straight away, but it will give you that retrospective ability to clean up after it's occurred, and the way to and have rapid response as well, and get in a couple of hours get a bandage pattern file or whatever to fix up the environment. So in that way, it is very useful. There we go. That's my answer. I'm quite passionate about that, actually. Antivirus is I find crucial. Yes. Next one.
Is it advisable to involve, or isn't it advisable to involve the legal team when an incident has occurred?
Um, It depends. So, obviously, if there is a legal element to the incident, then definitely. And this is kind of the criteria you need to put in your incident response plan. There should be uh, a contact list, and with each contact, there should be a reason for contacting the contact list. Generally, I include the legal team when there may be some law broken, obviously, when there is a need to liaise with government agencies, or when there is a possibility that you might, sue someone for damages or something like that. Give them the option for that. But if there's a virus outbreak, right, and it's and this is the classic example, then they may not like to be told, hey, we've got a virus outbreak. What do you want us to do about it? So it really depends on the incident and if and what role your legal team plays in your organization. But they're the general guidelines. And we'll go for one more, Maggie. Yeah,
Yep. Um, do you recommend contact lists contain potential victims who are outside the organization?
contact lists contain potential victims.
Yeah, I guess there's mentioning people outside the organization who aren't victims yet, but might be if there's some sort of attack.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Generally, your incident, Um, if obviously it's going to affect your customers, then you have an obligation to notify your customers, definitely. Uh, but that generally wouldn't be in your contact list. It um, might be an instruction to in the incident response plan to include a possibility for that if customers are impacted. Hopefully, if you're the cybersecurity manager, you are you have a good idea of who is who your partners are and who your industry contacts are. So that you may include them as contacts, and certainly for government agencies as well if you need to contact those. So yeah, uh, that's probably answering the question. Do we have time for one more, Margie, or is that kind of it? Shall we do one more?
Um, yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, one moment. I'm just going through the list again.
No problem.
Uh, the GoToWebinar has an excellent interface that continually unsorts itself. Um, okay, I've already asked that question. I'm going to scroll back down again because I've scrolled up too far. All right. Um, so what steps should you take to capture accurate information for prosecuting an attacker?
Oh, that's a whole subject in itself, and I'm hoping the person who asked that was in the forensics one recently, the forensics MOOC. But basically, you have to grab as much as you can, and the whole idea, and there's some controversy in this, but the whole idea is you grab the volatile information first, and then non-volatile second, and you work your way from there. You get what you can off the network, and you take copies of hard disks. And if it's if there's a requirement for a forensic investigation, that's what you do definitely. If there's criminal activity involved, so then you need to make sure you keep all that evidence safe and secure, and that means ensuring there's a chain of custody, and that also allows you to have the right documentation and process to have it submissible to court as well. So that's the high level answer. But yeah, that's a bit of a topic in itself. So Margie, I think that's kind of it. I'm happy to stop the recording there if I think we're done for this webinar. I'll post again the discussion questions for this tomorrow. And I wish you all the best in doing this week's exercise. And I look forward to all the comments and discussion around that, and how many of you get your logs, your failed authentication logs through to our central Greylog server, which will be a lot of fun. So thank you, everyone. sticking through it. There was a lot of information in there and a lot of meat. And we've gone over an hour and a half, so you've all stuck through it really well. Well done for a Wednesday night when it's really hot.